Hey class, I just wanted to take the time to go over week 3. This week is a lighter week than the previous weeks. We only have one discussion this week. But first I wanted to review some of the readings and the videos that we have. This week is going to be learning about neuroscience, neurobiology as it relates to substance use disorders. I'm hoping a lot of you find this interesting. I know many of you had posed some questions that relate to the cause of addiction and, what are some factors that might lead certain people towards addiction while others are more resilient to it. So some of these readings may answer some of those questions for you. The first is Chapter 2, Neurobiology of Substance Use Disorders and Implications for Treatment. That's the chapter in the textbook this week. This is a really thorough review of neuroscience and addiction. I am guessing many of you have read about neuroscience related to things like trauma in previous courses. At least I'm hoping you've been introduced to this a bit. This is something that we don't often learn about in social work education, but increasingly we're learning more and more about it because we're learning how biology is a factor in mental health as well as substance use disorders. I want you to kind of think about what you know about trauma in the brain while you're reading some of this, because you will see how it makes sense that people who have experienced trauma may be more susceptible to substance use disorders, just in terms of with trauma, the amygdala might be more activated. There might be more hypervigilance just from a neurobiology standpoint, whereas substances may kind of dull some of those reactions and increase pleasurable responses in the brain temporarily. We do know that substances, in terms of brain chemistry, while it might increase those pleasurable responses initially, it decreases pleasurable responses when there is not access to the substance. So, you can see where it would get started, but you can also see where it would actually worsen the impact of the mental illness or the impact of the trauma responses. So you do have 2 articles this week. There is The Paradox of Addiction, Neuroscience. That article kind of reviews the disease concept related to addiction. I mean, both of them really look at the disease concept. We're looking more at biology here this week. But, the second article can look a bit more into where the paradigm shift was and the history of what we've known about addiction and some of the positives and negatives that might come from the view of the disease concept. Whereas it might make people with addiction feel a higher self-esteem because they can understand that this is their body's response versus a moral issue. It can also cause people to view people with substance use disorders as different and maybe isolate them a little bit more, put them into a different group. So there's always positives and negatives. I think overall we have to look at addiction from multiple different standpoints. There is a social impact, there's environmental, there's neurological. There are so many factors that go into the cause of addiction. In terms of genetics as well, we can look at it from the standpoint of similar to generational trauma. What we know is that there are things that are passed down genetically in terms of brain chemistry and what, may be more susceptible to being more impulsive or, things of that nature that might be passed down generation to generation. And that might make people a bit more susceptible to addiction, but it doesn't mean they will experience substance use disorders. I think that's an important thing to understand as well. Just because somebody has a history in their family of substance use disorders does not necessarily mean that they will develop a substance use disorder, but it may make them more prone to developing a substance use disorder. So it is important to educate about moving forward through the videos. I hope you find these helpful. It goes into a little bit more of the addiction in the brain. We have addiction in the brain for kids, which I find really helpful. These are things that I'm hoping more and more we start educating children about, because we know that early use of substances can increase the likelihood of developing a substance use disorder. I think education about this early on is really important so that kids can gain some understanding of how it actually could affect their brain. It's not necessarily just something that they're going out socially and doing for fun. It can be a progressive thing that, they can develop a substance use disorder in the future. There have been programs throughout our lives, seeking to reduce the susceptibility of substance use disorders and education for children. There have been many programs that we have found have been ineffective. I'm hoping that providing some education about all of the factors that come into play for developing substance use disorders can, the more we know about it and the more that we educate our kids about it, I'm hoping that can reduce the prevalence in the future. So it's just a cute little video for kids explaining neurobiology and how it relates to addiction. And here you'll see a short TED Talk. This is a woman who's explaining neuroscience. She made it her goal in life to understand addiction and even work towards cure for addiction. She is somebody who has experienced substance use disorder herself. It's just giving you some further understanding of the neuroscience and how it plays into substance use disorders. So then we have your discussion for the week. So you're going to first review all of the learning resources, and then here for your initial prompt, I want you to copy and paste all of this into your questions for the initial post. And you're going to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, and 10 is being the most. So these are all questions just trying to understand what your base knowledge of neuroscience was, and specifically as it relates to substance use and addiction. And then you're going to summarize your reflections on your comfort level of you educating and providing this information to your clients. This information that you're gathering and understanding in this week of the course is going to be a big factor in the psychoeducation piece of addiction treatment. A lot of people with substance use disorders, they might question where it comes from as well, and they might gain some it might be really helpful for them to know the neuroscience behind addiction. Like it did mention in the article, it can kind of reduce the stigmatizing of addiction to understand the neuroscience behind it. And many people may feel that they can maybe externalize the problem a little bit more. It's less of an internal flaw to them, and it's more of a disease, and they can tackle that. So that's where psychoeducation about this is so important to treatment. And also I want you to look at where can you gain more information about the subject. There's so much information out there about just generally the biological factors when it comes to addiction, specifically with neuroscience. Your chapter in your textbook this week does go a bit into harm reduction and, what that looks like for, brain chemistry. So for instance, decreasing the pleasurable aspect or component of alcohol use, for instance, with naltrexone. That is something that is very neurobiology focused. So those are things that might be involved with the education and things that you might be able to gain more information about and just kind of identify where you might be able to find that information. As usual, I do want you to respond to at least one classmate, what you've learned from them, and what you can do to increase their comfort level with providing this information to people. Like I said, this information can tend to be a little less of a comfort level for people in social work because, we went into social work for a reason. We know that there is some science and medical aspects of it, and many of you probably did take biology classes in your undergraduate degrees. But generally, we went into social work and not thinking it was a very medical based field. Though it is very important for us to understand all of the different areas that may contribute to developing things like mental illness or substance use disorders. And this is just one of those factors, like I said. It is important as we kind of close this week to know that neuroscience is one aspect of the cause of substance use disorders. And there are other contributing factors, like I said, such as social, environmental. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out. I hope you enjoy the week, and I hope it furthers your understanding of substance use disorders.